Hello! Welcome to Why Not Both? My name is Pam Schaefer, and I'm a musician and therapist in Los Angeles. Why Not Both is all about how our multiple passions inform our identity, and this season we are brought to you by Under the Radar magazine and produced by Laura Studeris. If you like what you hear, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform and come spend time with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, and that is both on Instagram and on Twitter. For this special Saturday edition of Why Not Both, we got to hang out with Morgan Kibby, aka White Sea. You might know her for her production work or her scoring work on multiple shows as well as films. She most notably just worked with Lady Gaga. I hope you enjoy our interview.
So I will welcome you to the podcast now.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So you are Morgan. I am Pam. This is Why Not Both. The first question that I often ask is a two-parter, and it is, what do you do? And is there a better question, in fact, than what do you do?
Yes. I am a musician, first and foremost, but I work in different parts of the music industry. So I started off in a band called M83, writing and singing, playing live.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went on to write for other people, just as a writer, lyricist, top line, doing additional production as well, depending on the projects, and have landed now as a composer for film and television.
Oh, wow. That is a wide range.
So I kind of do all of those things. I mean, I kind of, that was the progression of things, but I definitely do a little bit of all three all the time. But composition is my main focus now.
Gotcha.
And to your second question, I think that's it's a loaded question, because I think there are some people who have the philosophy that you aren't what you do, but I'm an artist, so I very much am what I do. It's a giant part of my life, and it defines big swaths of my personality and who I am and how I operate in the world. And it's the thing that drives me. Being creative is what drives me. So I would say that asking what I do is actually a very important question, but that's for me specifically.
Yes.
So I can't speak for other people, but for me, I actually don't think that there is a better question. I think that's a great question.
Hey! So when you were saying that being an artist has informed your identity a lot, I was curious, like, what changed between, say, being on tour with M83 and writing for them versus then writing for other people versus writing for TV? Because I would assume that those would kind of tap into different parts of your identity.
Not really, actually, because all three are centered around collaboration, first and foremost. And also, frankly, the kernel of the projects are not actually generated by me. So for example, with M83, it really was Anthony's project. So though we were collaborating on songs and writing together, it's his band, right? So it's his vision for what those albums that I was involved with would end up being. I was just there to help facilitate and expand that vision. And the same thing goes for writing for other people. When you're writing on someone's album, generally speaking, they have an idea of what the themes are for their record, whether it's lyrical or textures in terms of production. So once again, that's feeding into somebody else's core vision. And then composition is kind of the ultimate example of that. I'm not the boss. I mean, I'm the boss of my department, yes, but I'm not the boss of the project. I'm not the driver of the project. I'm coming in after something's been shot, and I'm collaborating with, most of the times the showrunner or the director to kind of craft the music that helps bring the vision of that project to life. So,
That's so cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I neglected to say earlier, but I did have a solo project for a while. I mean, I still do. I still work on it. Not as much, although I've kind of started to dive back into it a little bit now. But I'm fond of saying that, like, what made me an amazing collaborator and composer is the thing that made me a shitty artist, which is that I'm really, really good at bringing my own voice to other people's projects. But when it comes down to me just expressing my voice on its own, I have been a late bloomer in terms of figuring that out.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So I feel, and I own that. And I also, I think that, a career, your expression, your identity, and your work it is a never-ending project. So to think that you have to have that voice figured out in your 20s is absolute bullshit. And unfortunately, I fell prey to thinking that was the case, and I used to beat myself up for it as if I was somehow, what's the word, like lacking, I suppose, or that I maybe wasn't supposed to be an artist. And the fact of the matter is that wasn't necessarily true. I just needed to take the time to develop my skills to be able to really understand myself more and express myself the way that I actually wanted to.
Yeah, because like there's that whole narrative of like, like the Wonderkind or the ingenue or like whatever you want to call it in an obscure European language. But it's like that whole thing of you have to be like initially good right out the gate as like a teenager or in your early 20s and be like, here's my voice, I found it. And I like
it. And yeah, it's just so fucking ridiculous. Pardon my French. I just think that like I swear a lot. I apologize.
I too am randomly speaking in French, so you're all good.
Yeah, I just think that I think it's been a journey that I've been on from the beginning of my career. On a I hate to use the word, but a more psychological, spiritual level, it has been to really tap into the understanding that your past is never going to look like anybody else's. Right. And so if things take a little bit more time, that is A-okay. If you really love what you do and you're passionate about it and you really work on it every day, then it's going to evolve and change over time. And the fact of the matter is things do get better with time, generally speaking. You get better at your craft, your skills and your techniques develop as an engineer, as a producer. I mean, the things that I've learned even in the last year are, that growth is kind of exponential. And while I completely, deeply respect people that come out of the gate and have incredible vision. I mean, I wish that had happened to me. I just wasn't one of those lucky ones. I don't think that that's generally speaking the case for most artists. And I think that we put a premium on youth and on the novelty of young vision when there's so much incredible work that's being done, particularly by women who suffer, I think, a lot more in terms of this, in the context of this conversation of age. There's just so much incredible work that comes out of you as you get older. Yeah, I hope I'm articulating that well.
You totally are. And I was thinking about, when you were talking, I was thinking about also how the narrative of being a collaborator is sometimes undervalued. Like, it sounds like you really are like a master in bringing other people's visions to light in a way that maybe they might not have, which I think like that's kind of like an unsung hero role.
Oh, totally. I mean, look, it's not as glamorous, but to be honest with you, like I'm 100% fine with that. I just want to be creative and I want to do immaculate, timeless work, whatever that looks like under whatever context that falls in.
Right, because I feel like, do you have anyone that does that for your work? Like, do you have a collaborator that kind of helps you bring your stuff to life?
Yeah, I mean, I've started to find people, especially over the last 2 years. It's taken me time, but I definitely have a couple of people that I lean on for perspective or for musical collaboration. Yeah, and that takes time because, frankly, it's a matter of taste as well, like your tastes aligning. Like, for example, I've worked with amazing mixers my entire career. I've been very lucky, but it's really only in the last year that I finally found somebody that I'm like, oh my God, please never leave me mix everything that I do.
So funny. I found that person for some of my pop stuff that I'm just like, mix every pop song I know.
Yeah. It's a question of taste. I mean, it takes it. And also, by the way, I probably haven't found that person before now because I probably didn't really know exactly what I was trying to accomplish before. So now that is more solidified within myself, it makes it easier for me to identify people that I know are good collaborators for my projects.
And I think that you're right, that a lot of that, it takes time. And I think that sometimes we beat ourselves up for then some of the things that we end up having to do in the meantime. Like, especially artists in their 20s where you're like, oh, I also had to work other jobs. I think that a lot of people sometimes feel shame for that in the music industry because you're like, well, I guess if I were really good, I wouldn't have to be doing this. But I think a lot of people simply, like, if you pull back the curtain, like, all of us have worked really weird jobs.
Oh my God. Yeah. Geez. I mean, like at the beginning of my career before I was doing music full time, I was an art restoration technician.
Whoa, that's actually what, like,
super,
because I'm like, tell me more.
super cool, very boring. You know, I mean, I got to work on some really amazing things, just historically speaking, but definitely not necessarily the career for me. But I have deep respect for it. It's a pretty amazing thing. But yeah, I mean, like we've all worked odd jobs before being able to make music, you know, our full-time endeavor in life.
Right.
But I do have to say I've been pretty lucky. I mean, I joined M83 when I was 23.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't really work too many odd jobs in my lifetime. I've worked mainly in music from my early 20s onward. So
gotcha.
I had like one bout of being somebody's personal assistant somewhere in there.
I like that you referred to it as a bout, like you accidentally came down with being a personal assistant and then you recovered.
Yeah, I'm not a good employee. I don't do well with having a boss. Let's put it that way. That doesn't mean that I like being a boss either, by the way. I just like working by myself, you know.
That's so funny. I love that it seems like people kind of like toss you something and you're like, I will take these raw materials and I will make them better, but in my own cave.
Yeah, exactly. The cave. That's it. The pain cave is what we like to call it, I think.
Pain cave.
Yeah, it's the pain cave. The pain cave of gorgeous creativity, I suppose.
Oh my goodness. But I mean, I just call it the music cave, though other things do get done in the music cave. I was like, there's definitely fairy lights, there's candles, there's a lot of coffee involved.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, I empathize. Yeah, I mean, especially when I switched over to composition, like I don't think I really knew what it was to work hard before I became a composer.
What can you speak to that? Because I think a lot of people don't get what it means to do that for TV and film.
So I do original score. So it's not songs, that's music placement. So that's kind of like, oh, there's a Beach Boys song during this part of the movie. We love it. Let's place that song. So that's song placement. I do the original score. So traditionally it's usually been orchestral scores in the past. So, you know, your John Williams of the world. And it has somewhat changed. I mean, I kind of, as a good reference, like to think of the soundtrack to The Social Network kind of being one of the moments where film was really opened up to musicians who weren't just doing orchestral work.
Right.
Not that was like the only thing that was happening, but I think it was the first time it was truly taken really seriously because Trent and Atticus, you know, they won the Oscar for the score.
Right. And so much of that was such interesting, I mean, much like the textures of their work for Nine Inch Nails, so much of it was like interesting sound design and abstract textures and things like that, as opposed to, like you said,
exactly.
like a traditional like Hans Zimmer and now here's 70 violins.
Exactly,
not that there's anything wrong with 70 violins, but like
no, and everything has its time and place, and every project, you know, requires different things. But what's great is that the score world has opened up to people such as myself since then in a way that I don't think it was as open before, or at least that's my experience of it. I may be wrong in that assessment, but and so I basically write, music for movies and TV, the score that you hear when you're watching something.
Mm-hmm. And what's the process like? Because I know that for film and TV, sometimes you get like a full edit of something. Sometimes you get just like daily shots of things. Like, what does your workflow look like for that?
Well, it's usually pretty standard to start working as they're editing stuff. I mean, I prefer not to, because then projects get like drawn out over months and months and months. I like to come on when there's a locked cut, especially for film. And so I'll get the locked cut, and then you'll spot the movie with the director and the producers. So you'll sit and watch it together, and you'll discuss where you want to have music. And a lot of times there will be temp that's placed by the editor, so temporary music tracks that they've pulled from libraries of music that kind of give you an idea for texture and mood, and you'll discuss it as you watch the film with the team, and then you'll sit down and you'll get to work and not take any breaks for the next 6 months, as it normally goes. So that's kind of like the basic structure is just coming on when things are locked, and then deciding where things need to be and taking it from there.
And how does that feel different than, say, when you were working with like M83? Like, what was the writing process there?
Well, I mean, writing a song is very different than writing a cue, or at least for me it is. There are some kind of tangential moments, I suppose, but a song, just to put it into perspective, like if I'm just doing lyric, I can write a lyric if I'm feeling on fire or not, if the lyric's shitty, in 15 minutes. You know what I mean? So like the lyric for Midnight City came out of me really quickly. I was done with it in about 20 minutes.
Yep.
And was in my PJs, had a bottle of wine, and that was that.
You're like, ta-da!
And then, so sometimes things come really quickly. But that doesn't mean that the song was done in 15 minutes. It just means that portion of it was written.
Yes.
And you'll have months when you're working on an album to reshape songs, rethink the arrangements, work on the production, etc., record things. When you're working in film and TV, you're always on a different kind of schedule. I mean, depending on the project. Like, for example, I'm working on a show right now where I'm delivering hour-long episodes once a week, which is
my goodness,
intense.
That's
and then it's a lot of music. Yeah, and I really care about the project. It's such an amazing TV show, and the music is also, sometimes you'll be on projects where the music needs to really stay out of the way and is more underscore, especially with documentary. Like I find a lot of times, like you're really kind of like sitting underneath of what's happening, especially since there's a lot of like interview footage or dialogue or voiceover. Right. But with film, there can be opportunities to really get bold and super creative. So this happens to be one of those projects. I'm just so thrilled because I'm really getting to do some very experimental and interesting things with the music. But the delivery schedule is just like, it's intense. It's really,
that's
really
kind
intense.
of bonkers to be writing like an entire hour of music weekly.
Yeah. And then granted, it's not a full 60 minutes of music, but you're looking at 30 minutes of music per episode, probably.
I was going to say, like, do they end up like reusing other cues that you've done, or is it original every single time? Like,
it's original every single time. There are themes and textures that get reimagined or music edited to maybe reoccur in future episodes, but it's never the same piece of music that's used, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense, because I'm thinking of, at the very least, like, I liked what you were talking about of kind of like bringing other people's visions to life, because at the very least you have like, that's one thing that like I personally have liked about doing scoring work, is that you have all the emotions there. You're just like, cool, I just need to make what those emotions sound like.
Yeah, and also, and it really makes you realize too that music can really make or break a project. Like I really firmly believe that. If you take a scene in the wrong direction, mood wise or textually, it can really affect the way that the film is digested or the TV show is digested by the audience.
Bad lighting.
Mm-hmm.
Where like all of a sudden, if you have bad lighting on someone, they have like really weird shadows on their face. They look like ominous and haggard and tired and weird. And then like you move the light by like a foot and you're like, oh, this person looks brilliant and beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's what's so fascinating about film, the creative medium of film and TV is that every job is so important. It's not just the acting, it's not just the editing, it's not just the music, it's not just the directing, etc., the DP, etc. It's like every single little portion of creativity that's brought to a project or this particular medium. Each person has such a stamp on what the collective experience is when you watch the film at the end of it. So
yes. And I think like you're right, like it's like one little thing can kind of like make it or break it, because then it kind of like ruins the spell.
Yeah. It can totally take you in a different direction. And I've been guilty of that too, where I'll be drafting something and I will maybe bring in a theme that I've written that maybe worked in another place, and I might incorrectly think that it'll work in the scene that I'm working on, and all of a sudden it turns it into like Cheeseville, you know what I mean? So it's like you have to be very, very careful, very, very careful, and like take mood and intent, I think, very seriously, and be very intentional about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So
definitely. That's so funny that you said that, because I think we've all experienced that in watching like a movie or film where all of a sudden like kind of like one of the characters like leitmotifs comes up again and you're like, oh, this again. You're like,
oh, totally.
Couldn't come up with a different one.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. And it is funny too, because it's like, there have been moments in the past where, you think you've written something absolutely brilliant and maybe the director doesn't agree with you, and, you have to write something ultimately that makes them happy. You're not the one, I let me put it this way. I pick and choose my moments to wage little skirmishes,
right?
Creative skirmishes. And I don't normally fight back unless I really, really disagree. But as a composer, you always have to keep in mind that it's not about what you want; it's about what your director wants. So
exactly. And I was thinking, I was like, gosh, that's such a different mode of working, even though it is bringing someone's vision to light, versus writing in a band and touring with them. And especially I was thinking about the difference in lifestyle of being on tour versus being a composer. Like that's a big gear shift.
Oh my God, you have no idea. Like total, I mean, Jesus. Yeah, it's so different. And by the way, I love both. Like both have been so incredible. Being on the road is there's something incredibly youthful and naive about waking up somewhere new every day, and also very monotonous and very exhausting, but also pretty amazing to get up and play shows and connect with people that way. I do miss that, I have to say, a little bit, because I spend 16, when I'm juggling projects, because I'm finally entering a point in my career where my budgets are starting to get a little bit healthier. But for the last 5 years, I switched careers when I was 30, which, lots of people who are established as composers, come straight out of college at 22 and hustle. And I missed those years, so I was kind of playing catch up. And as a result, I made a decision to say yes to everything. Like it was a season in my career of saying yes. There was no room to say no, for many different reasons. I needed to build my resume so people could trust me. I needed to, frankly, just get better and get my feet wet and dive in and get dirty and figure things out. So I haven't really had the opportunity to have a team. That's starting to change now for me, which is awesome. But, in the thick of things, when I was doing 2-3 projects at a time, I was working 16, 17 hours a day, waking up, 5 a.m., going to bed at midnight, really trying to make sure that I'm staying on top of deliverables, deadlines, drafts. And I couldn't afford to have an assistant to help me with all the minutia. And I'm definitely not the kind of composer that feels comfortable handing off creative work to other people. Like I have to do all of that. But there's a big portion of what I do that's comprised of technical minutia, so prepping stems, getting things ready for your orchestrator, the recording, like all that kind of stuff. And I didn't have any help with that, which was pretty brutal. And it's only in the last 6 months, I'd say, that I felt like I was finally in a place where I could start saying no to things, and found an amazing young woman to help me on the assistant side. She's just wonderful, and she's coming up, and she's very young and very good at what she does. And so I've slowly started to build my team a little bit. I have an amazing music editor now that I trust with everything. Yay. And mixer, and so it comes together slow but sure.
Well, and exactly like you said, I think that coming from like a creative standpoint, like I'm like, oh, I totally get what you're saying. But for listeners who like don't know what like stemming out a song is, it's basically taking every track and having to make like a separate file for every sound that's on there. So it's literally like the bane of every musician's existence, where you're like, well, I just wrote a 65 track song. Now I have to export it 65
gotta stem it
times.
Multiply that by 15 cues per episode. You know what I mean? Like it gets really intense. I really had no idea. I was very naive. And I'm glad that I was, because if I had known how hard it was going to be, it might have given me pause, and not in a, I don't think it would have deterred me, but I think it would have given me pause. It's, I've sacrificed a lot. But then again, I'm also a workaholic, so that probably has something to do with it.
Well, and I'm glad that you found people that you can trust on your team now, that it's like, when you said, I was in a period of saying yes, I was like, no, that makes total sense, because 1, you want to get a variety of experience. 2, you want to pick up opportunities. And 3, it sounds like if someone had told you all of this, you would have been like, oh, okay. But like, it's different than when you're doing it.
Yeah. Yes. And that's kind of been like, frankly, my whole experience as a musician. I was lucky enough to study classical piano as a child and a young adult. And then I took up the cello when I was a teenager. But, outside of that, I didn't go to school for music. So, those were all kind of private lessons once a week when I was a kid. So I feel like I've learned everything just through doing it. Which can be very frustrating sometimes. I think one of my biggest regrets in life is, or not regrets, one of my biggest desires that has never quite manifested was having a mentor. I never had a mentor, and I feel like I've had to really just be on my own, figuring things out, which, by the way, it's fine, and I've made it work. And I'm very lucky. I think my work ethic is part of the reason why I've been able to transition and be successful in the various careers that I've decided to pursue.
Right.
But there's something to be said for feeling like somebody that's better, wiser, smarter than you has your back, and I have not really ever had that. I've had it on the business side of the music industry. So my old publisher, Carrie Ann Marshall, was very much a mentor for me. She was one of the partners and owners of Songs Music Publishing, and I'm so forever grateful to her, just because of her belief in me and her dedication to making sure that we remain colleagues and friends even after not working together. Like, she's just been an amazing cheerleader and guide.
That's so cool.
But on the creative side, I feel very lucky. I have 1 or 2 women like her in my life, which I'm extremely grateful for. But on the creative side, I haven't really ever had that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, and it's sometimes hard to in some ways it sounds like you have charted your own course, but it's sometimes hard to chart your course if you don't see people that are even on kind of similar courses.
Oh yeah. If anything, I'm definitely a wild card, which I like. Yeah. I like to remind like younger creatives a lot, like, please the earlier you can in your career, just remember and mantra yourself into believing and knowing that your career is not going to look like anybody else's. And if you're doing it right, it will never look like anybody else's, like ever.
Right.
And it shouldn't, because that means that you're not doing what's best for you. So, you know, if things happen a little bit later than maybe they do for your friends that graduated at the same time as you or what have you, like, that's okay. Just keep your head down and really develop your voice and your point of view, because that's really the thing that ultimately gets you hired.
I was gonna say, it's always like music is so nonlinear. And then what you're saying about developing your own voice, it was funny. I was talking to a friend of mine who does biochem engineering. And he just finished his postdoc, and I was saying something about how, you know, it was really great to be hearing about all of these music writers and composers and everyone who are now in, like, particularly female, that are in like our 30s and our 40s and our 50s. And he was saying in biochem engineering, if you publish something before your late 30s, people kind of side eye you. They're like, why are you telling us about this? Like, you're not old enough to know about this.
Yeah.
Like, we were talking about kind of like how it's almost like reverse ageism, where in some fields, if you're not, you know, if you don't have kind of the experience, people don't want to hear from you. Whereas in music, you're almost expected to not have experience. But then conversely, I liked what you were saying about how you know, like, you took private lessons, but you learned by doing. And that, I think, potentially, I don't know if this is accurate, but like, it might have given you an interesting viewpoint because you didn't have to like unlearn anything. It's like you were just discovering.
Yeah, I mean, trust me, I think about this a lot, and I don't have an answer, but you know, I trust my instincts, and I think I'm lucky enough to have really good instincts. So nothing is taboo or not right in my world and in my purview when I'm working. That being said, education is like key and paramount. And I do wish that I had, for example, like better theory. Like, I wish my theory was better. I wish that I had orchestration skills that were not entry level orchestra. You know what I mean? Like, there are things that I feel sometimes like I'm playing catch up, but at the same time, you know, I've spoken to some friends of mine who do come from that very strict and very accomplished college education.
Yeah.
And you know, and they've even said to me, like, yes, I get what you're saying in terms of that insecurity, feeling like maybe that's not something that you're good at, but at the same time, you're going to try things that we would never try, and it's going to give you a result that's very unexpected and beautiful. So, you know, but by the way, let's be honest, sometimes that plays out great, and sometimes you fall flat on your face. You know what I mean? So it's very much a give and take, very much a give and take. You know, there's an expansive sense of possibility with the not knowing, and there's also a real sense of I don't know, foundation that you can pull from to spark ideas that maybe I don't have access to because I wasn't formally educated, you know?
Well, I think in some ways, like, spectacular failure is sometimes incredibly informative. Like, I occasionally like it when I'm writing something and I was like, wow, that did not work, like, on almost like a tragic level.
Yeah.
Then I can learn from what I did, because like sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm going to go out on this limb. And I was like, that limb broke and I've now rolled down a hill.
Right. No, completely. I mean, it's funny because I know people talk about like failure being such an important part of growing. And I mean, I cannot echo that enough. I think that being really crap at something for a bit is imperative, because it teaches you what you like, what you don't like, what you're good at, what you need to improve. But I also think that it's remembering that you're always going to fail. Like, there's never going to be a moment where all of a sudden everything you do is amazing. It's just not physically possible. And, you know, one thing I really despise about our culture now is that we write off people so quickly, creatively, if it doesn't resonate with us and we don't give them a second chance. You know, I've written some real crap music in the past. You know, and it's also that balance too of like, I know that when I'm listening to something, I have great taste, but I don't always have great taste when I'm writing my own stuff. And I am always on this journey to try to bridge that gap so that my taste as a consumer is mirrored in my taste as a creator.
It's so hard to see one's work objectively, though, and I think like sometimes I respect people whose like artistry that like that I mainly enjoy. I sometimes respect it when they have a song or two where I'm like, wow, I am not on that train, but I respect that you made it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, like there are like a couple artists that it doesn't matter what they do. It doesn't matter how much I dislike it. I will always follow them to the ends of the earth. I mean, perfect example, like Joni Mitchell is one of those artists for me. Do I like her Mingus album? Maybe not so much.
Right.
But the fact that she did it is incredible. She's expressing herself. She's exploring, same thing with, I mean, just as another example, it's like Radiohead. Like there may be songs here and there that don't resonate with me, but I will always be on that journey with them because I think that the intention is it's so pure in the sense of them trying to create great art and trying to push themselves. And I have deep, deep, deep respect for people that think like that because frankly, it's actually not as common as we would like to believe.
Yes. And I think respecting, kind of taking like the long view of things where there might be kind of bumps along the road where you're like, well, that didn't resonate with me, but I respect that you're expressing yourself in this way. And maybe that's something that's not my jam. But for the most part, you are my jam and I see what you're doing and that makes me happy.
Right.
So I got the next.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that you help other people bring that to life because when you said like you want your taste to kind of align with what you're creating, it sounds almost like from what you said it's easier to do that. I might be wrong, but it might be easier to do that on other people's work.
Oh my God, of course. And that's why I have such a deep respect for artists that have clear access to their voice. Because that is takes a lot of balls to like really commit to what comes out of you naturally and hone that despite what other people might think of it. It is very easy to do it for other people because when I'm working with somebody that has a clear vision, I can plug myself into that galaxy and kind of understand like what that looks like. What are the colors? What does it feel like? And I really love doing that. It's a real joy. Somebody flesh out their intents.
Well, and that's such like hearing that as an artist, like it always makes me feel so cared for when I'm working with someone that really truly listens to what I'm doing and also is able to enhance it because they understand it. Like that feels so good. Like when I'm working with like another producer or things like that, when I'm like, oh, you got it. You got the message and you're making the message better.
Yeah, exactly. And that's trust too. I mean, it takes time. I've worked with so many people over the years and you know what? It doesn't always click and that's okay too.
And that's all right. Like that, I think that I respect that a lot too. And when you said that now you have a team that like you trust, I'm like, it takes a long time to build that trust and to also like develop, it sounds like you've taken a lot of time to develop your listening ears essentially, where you're like, oh no, I'm going to be open to the message and then I'm going to help you make it even better and clearer to others. I'm like, because that's a huge skill. Like working with a few different producers, I've definitely been like, oh, I see kind of where you're going with that, but that wasn't where that song was going.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes somebody can recommend or suggest something and it's something you never thought of that grows on you. And you might think initially that it's not right. And then you kind of come around to it. I mean, that's the joy of collaboration is you got options. You know what I mean? You're presented with options and then it's ultimately up to the artist to make the decision about what direction you're going to be taking the song or the record. So.
I do always say that, like, when in doubt, like, track something because the worst that could happen is you don't use it.
Exactly.
I don't know if you've ever done that, like going through your drafts where you listen to like various parts of it and you're like, wow, I have really no idea what I was doing there, but like, good job me.
Yeah, it's like you can't choke the idea before it's even born. You know what I mean? Like you have to, you just got to let it flow. And I think that part of for me, I won't speak for anybody else, but one of my biggest challenges as an artist historically in my past has been to judge the idea before I even let it happen.
Oh, yeah, that's a tricky one. Like, how do you turn off that like voice that starts almost like meta critiquing what you're doing?
I think you get older. Number one, age has been the biggest gift for that for me.
Mm-hmm.
The confidence that comes with doing what I've been doing for almost, oh my God, almost a decade and a half, no, 16, 17 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, when you're going through that process over and over and over again, you start to understand its inner workings, and you're able to start to see the crutches, see the pitfalls, see the parts of yourself that maybe don't need to be given voice at that moment in time. And also, there's a fear. For me personally, there's been a very new access to fearlessness. I think of just like, I don't care what it is anymore. I just want it to resonate emotionally for me. So even though there are definitely production things that have developed that I'm understanding my sound as an artist more clearly now, I kind of don't really care how it comes together. I just want it to emotionally impact me the way that I intended when I started to write it. And if it doesn't do that, then I know I'm not on the right track.
Got it. And that I think is a good kind of guidepost of like, does this make me feel? And it's almost like you were describing with scoring, where it's like tapping into the emotion that you're being presented, and it's either like, did I nail that or did I not? It's not getting all tangled up in like, oh well, do I have the right plug-in chain on this?
Yeah, exactly. Because all of that stuff is solvable. I mean, and granted, like, it depends on how you work. Like, I know for me, effects can sometimes be a huge part of how the emotion is created in a song, but more often than not, or I should say lately, I've actually been going back to bare basics where I'm writing songs at the piano, which I didn't do for over a decade. I was like allergic to my piano. Yeah, I just hated doing it. It just felt so corny to me. I was like, I don't want to make this kind of music. It's not where my head is at. And then something just clicked where I was like, oh yeah, I have to get back to songwriting. I need to stop thinking about production first and get back to songwriting, because that's really what's the most important part of this process for me right now.
That's so interesting, because yeah, like, I mean, they're both kind of like, they're both integral, because a song is going to sound completely different if it's just like an acoustic piano song versus a fully produced one, obviously, she says, as being Captain Obvious. But I feel like I feel like sometimes I'll listen to things, and even if they have like really excellent production work, like I'll appreciate kind of like, it's almost like having a really nice bunch of Christmas tree ornaments, but it's like, if you don't have a tree to put them on. I'm Jewish, so I don't know if this analogy holds. I'm I'm an expired Jew. I'm not practicing, but like certainly was born that way.
I'm like the worst Jew ever. I get a Christmas tree every year. It brings me such joy. I'm like, Jews for Christmas all the way over here.
That is so funny. When I was a little kid, I went to a Christmas party, like kind of not understanding the concept. I was really, really little. And they had all the decorations, so I just like draped myself in tinsel because I was like, oh, sweet.
Yeah, gal. I love it.
And it was like, no, small child. So
I
that was
love
my
it.
version. Apparently, I am the Christmas tree.
But I think you're right. I think you're totally right, though. I think that's a good analogy. I mean, I think that but then again, it's also, it's so tricky, though, because I hear myself saying that, and I'm like, well, but that's not always true, because you can listen to a record from Tangerine Dream and go like, okay, well, that's not traditional songwriting, and yet it's incredibly emotional and absolutely fucking fantastic, and the production is the song, so it's like, it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, I suppose, is maybe more
maybe
the
their
point.
structure isn't like a tree. Maybe theirs is like a topiary or like a shrubbery.
Yeah.
Like they have a Hanukkah bush.
Exactly. A solstice tree.
Exactly. I'm like getting really obscure in my head. I'm like, they have a sukkah. I'm like, no. Yeah, because I do agree with you when I listen to, or like ambient music especially, like follows a completely different structure, but it's not structure less. Like that's what
No. But I think the way that you're songwriting though is very different.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely.
You know, it's not even comparable to, you know, listening to a Bob Dylan track or whatever, you know?
Right.
Right. And then, you know, what's so amazing about modern music too is that there are definitely songs that without, even if they're well-written songs, if it didn't have the specific production that was on it, would it have had the impact that it did? You know, like there are a lot of experimental. I mean, I'm searching my head for an example, and maybe this is a shitty example, so I apologize to your listeners. But like, I think about James Blake. You know, when I think about that huge synth swell in his first single, what was that song called? Like
the Limit to Your Love one or a different one?
No, I think it was a different one. I was on the same album, but oh yeah, the one that goes like,
yeah.
So when you hear that big synth swell, there's nobody on the face of the planet that could convince me that if that wasn't there, it would have the same impact. And by the way, that's a fucking brilliantly written song.
Yes.
But that one element takes it to such a heightened place for me emotionally. And this is my own experience of the song, that, you know, it's a perfect illustration for me of what we're talking about, where the songwriting is important, but hey, sometimes the production can really elevate and change the way that you digest what you're listening to.
Exactly. Like I'm even thinking about, you know, like I was thinking of some of Billie Eilish's songs where Phineas and her production work on it is so brilliant, and the songs themselves are so tightly written. But what makes them sonically interesting, other than the fact that they're good songs, is the production work itself. Like that's what makes you kind of pay attention and be like, what's that? It's almost like giving you kind of like little bits of ear candy to lure you in, and then they're like, surprise.
Exactly.
Great song.
Exactly. No, I completely agree.
And those skill sets, it's interesting that you're talking about them, because that, like, you know, it's kind of the thesis of this podcast is like having these multiple passions or multiple interests is how you end up like expressing yourself. Because obviously it sounds like you're passionate about both, like the songwriting and the production.
Yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about a lot of things, if I'm being honest. You know, like and by the way, like I started out as an actress. I had a television show. Like I've had so many careers. It's hilarious.
Way to bury the lead. You were an actress. You did art restoration. I'm like, what?
Yeah, no. So I just think that creative people are multifaceted most of the time. And enjoy expressing themselves however that comes out. And I think this is why we have a lot of musicians who are really incredible actors.
Right.
You know, I look at somebody like Lady Gaga, who I just worked with, by the way.
Heck yeah. Yeah, you did.
You know, she's a perfect example of somebody who's a brilliant musician and who's also, I mean, she blows me away when she acts. And it's because she is a consummate performer. She's, you know, we have access to this emotive thing, I think, as creators, and that can translate into just different mediums. It's weird to me that we're expected to do only one thing, that that's somehow even a part of the equation or the conversation, I should say.
I've always thought that was very strange as well, you know, hence why I started the podcast, so I'd have an excuse to talk to lots of people who do
I love
multiple things.
I love it. Awesome. So awesome.
Because I think in some ways, like even within the narrative of, oh, I'm really passionate about one thing, like the music, obviously when you said like that is what you do, it's informed by the fact that you're passionate about multiple facets of it and that you have other modes of expression as well. And I think that that's what gets kind of underplayed when we try to understand people. If we're like, oh, what are the dimensions on which I understand you? And you're like, oh, all of that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I also know so many people who, and this is just expanding on any creative field. I just think creatives are multifaceted people with their creativity. I have dear friends who are exceptional composers who are also unreal visual artists, you know. Definitely not one of my skills, but I But I know people who are, and I have deep respect for that. I think that's just so cool to be able to express yourself in multiple ways like that. It's amazing.
Yes, yes. One of my friends is a wonderful musician and producer, and she also has done so much of actually my photography and even filmed a video underwater for me. That was crazy.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And that to me, I love working with her because she has such like a precise vision that like she'll literally move you around while she's photographing you, which I love because I'm like, hey, you're the one seeing me. I'm living in my body, so I don't know what it looks like. Like
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
position me as you will.
Love it.
But it's so cool hearing her music and seeing her photographs. Her name is Zoe Ruth Irwin. She lives in Reykjavik now. She's from LA though, and it's fun hearing.
I know her.
You know
I know
Zoe?
her.
Oh my god!
Yeah. I
Oh
mean,
my
we're
god!
not acquaintances, but of course, I know her. Yeah,
Oh, that
awesome.
is
She's
so
very
funny.
talented,
Oh
very
my
gifted.
god! Yes, yes. And so she's so much fun to work with because like I feel like there's a consistency across her photography and across her music, and she's focused on music since she moved really. And has her own studio space now, which is awesome. When I was there, I got to visit her.
Awesome.
I'm clearly in favor of candles in studios. But I like that, like, she didn't strive to be like, oh, I'm only one thing or the other. Like, she was just like, yep, this is who I am. I do both these things.
I love it.
It's
Yeah,
just
there
like,
just can't be any apology for it. You just have to kind of do the thing. I'm not in the business of convincing people one way or the other. You know what I mean?
there you
The
go.
work speaks for itself, in my opinion.
I think that is like a fantastic note because I was gonna say like, what's your advice to people? But I was like, that's pretty solid. The work speaks for itself. It's like,
Yeah, my advice to people is it's never easy, and you have to keep doing what you do because you love it. There's just literally no reward that's ever going to be better than that.
right.
I definitely think that. Yeah.
Do it because you love it.
Wish I had more to add, but I think that's kind of the advice I give to myself is like the moment that it's not joyful is the moment that I stop doing it.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that it's not really fucking hard all the time, by the way.
Yeah, and I was gonna say there's a difference between like seeking moments of joy and seeking contentedness in what you do versus thinking you're gonna like always be happy or it's always gonna be easy. Like I don't think that's what you're talking about, but it seems like, is it fulfilling? Do you feel like you're in love with it?
Yeah.
You're not like,
Yeah.
you question that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and the work ethic is just so important regardless. Like, I think
Yes.
that we just don't talk about it enough. Like it really, I can't even tell you how many moments I've had over the last couple of years where I look up and I'm like, oh my God, I just got better at this. And it is the best feeling in the world to feel like I'm evolving.
Isn't
and that
that
doesn't
amazing?
come. Yeah, it's really incredible. And it really comes from just being really, really, really dedicated. And I think that I really admire people who are dedicated to what they do, who are deeply dedicated to what they do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's a very underrated quality because being an artist is really, really hard. And I have deep, deep respect for people that decide to be artists in their lifetime.
I really liked it. It was actually of all things from like a YouTube yoga video. like things are about to get deep. But it was specifically for like a yoga arm workout. And it's like an intense 10-minute video. Like by the end, you're like, do I have arms anymore? Are they made? But I like at the end of it, she says like, if any of this is challenging for you, keep doing it. And I was just like, heck yeah. Like, and she says it in a calm way, not like a yelling at you workout way.
Yeah,
but,
of course.
It's true because it's like when you're doing it in the moment, you're like, oh my God, can I get through this? And sure enough, you make it through the workout and you get stronger and stronger and stronger, but it's so incremental that it's not like you're going to notice within the 10 minutes. So all of a sudden you're like, cool, I'm like Yoga Hulk.
There's no immediate reward. There really is no immediate reward. But then when you've done something, I mean, I honestly don't think there's a better feeling that I've had in my life than doing something that I'm incredibly proud of. Like like just whether it's writing a song or coming up with a melody or whatever, like those moments of like real flow state where you're connecting to yourself and to your work, and it pays off. Like, my God, it's like the best feeling in the world.
And like, that's the feeling to kind of not chase, but welcome in.
Yeah, absolutely. And know that it's not always going to be there. And as you get better at doing what you're doing, maybe those intense emotional moments of release aren't always there, but you can stand behind your work. I mean, that's like one of the joys of being dedicated, is that you do just see yourself get better and better.
Exactly.
And that's just a personal thing. I just feel very proud of that and very excited by that when I feel it happening, when I feel that growth happening.
That's amazing. I'm like, I can't wait to hear more of your music now. I'm like, keep doing it. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Why Not Both. It's been amazing getting to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of Why Not Both. If you liked what you heard, please make sure to like us and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. You can also come hang out with us on social media. We are at WNB the podcast, both on Instagram and Twitter. This season, we are brought to you by Under the Radar. Under the Radar is a nationally distributed print, music, and entertainment magazine and website. You can find them at www.undertheradarmag.com, and feel free to support them on Patreon. Extra special thanks to our producer, Laura Studeris, who has been absolutely amazing. Thank you again, and I look forward to next week's episode.